Isaiah Calhoun choked on the acrid smoke as the rebel yell echoed through the blood-soaked cornfield. He scrambled for cover behind a shattered wagon wheel, the stench of burnt powder thick in his nostrils. The metallic tang of blood clung to everything. His hands trembled as he fumbled for another cartridge. "They're coming, Calhoun." A voice rasped beside him. It was Sergeant Mallory, his face grimed with dirt and fear. Mallory was a good man, a steady hand in the chaos of battle. "How many?" Isaiah shouted, trying to make himself heard over the din of musket fire. "Too damn many," Mallory replied, spitting on the ground. "They ain't taking no prisoners today, not colored ones anyway." Isaiah knew what Mallory meant. Confederate soldiers had a reputation, a brutal policy. Capture for a black Union soldier meant execution, pure and simple. It was a fate he wasn't ready to meet. Not today. He hadn't even been paid this month, half the wages of the white soldiers for what? To die without even the respect afforded to the enemy. "We fight," Isaiah said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. "We make 'em pay." "We fight," Isaiah said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. "We make 'em pay." Mallory nodded, his eyes scanning the tree line. "That's the spirit, Isaiah. But we fight smart. We ain't got the numbers for a straight-up brawl." He gestured towards a shallow gully that ran parallel to the Union line. "We fall back to the gully. Better cover narrows their advance." Isaiah didn't need convincing. He'd seen enough men cut down in open ground to know the value of cover. He scrambled back, keeping low, the acrid smell of gunpowder stinging his nostrils. The gully offered little protection, really, just a depression in the earth, barely knee-high in places. But it was better than nothing. Mallory positioned his men, a handful of weary soldiers, their faces a mixture of determination and dread. He placed Isaiah towards the rear, near a cluster of scrub bushes. "Keep your head down, son. Conserve your powder. Only fire when you got a clear shot." The Confederate advance was relentless. They came on in waves, screaming the rebel yell, a sound that sent a shiver down Isaiah's spine. He gripped his musket, his knuckles white. He tried to focus, to block out the noise, the fear, the knowledge that if he fell, there would be no quarter given. The first wave hit the Union line, a chaotic clash of steel and fury. Isaiah could hear the screams of the wounded, the thud of bodies hitting the ground. The air was thick with smoke, making it hard to see. Mallory was moving among his men, shouting encouragement, directing their fire. He was a bulwark, a rock in the storm. Isaiah watched him, drawing strength from his resolve. The sergeant knew the odds, they all did, but he refused to yield. A Confederate soldier crested the gully, his face contorted in a snarl, a bayonet fixed to his rifle. He lunged at a young private next to Isaiah, the bayonet flashing in the sunlight. Without thinking, Isaiah raised his musket and fired. The soldier grunted, stumbled, and fell, the bayonet clattering on the hard earth. The private stared at Isaiah, his eyes wide with shock. "You all right, boy?" Isaiah asked, his voice hoarse. The private nodded, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Yeah, I'm all right. "Thanks, Isaiah. Just keep fighting," Isaiah said, reloading his musket. "That's all we can do." The Confederate attack intensified. They were pouring over the gully now, their numbers overwhelming the defenders. Mallory's men were falling back, fighting hand to hand, desperate to hold their ground. Isaiah fired again, dropping another Confederate soldier. But for every one he felled, two more took his place. He felt a sharp pain in his arm, a burning sensation that made him gasp. He looked down and saw blood seeping through his sleeve. He'd been hit. He gritted his teeth and kept fighting, ignoring the pain. He couldn't afford to stop, not now. He had to keep going for himself, for his comrades, for the hope of something better. Mallory saw that Isaiah was wounded. He pushed his way through the melee, reaching Isaiah's side. "You hit, son?" Isaiah nodded, his face pale. "Just a scratch. Get back," Mallory ordered. "Fall back to the main line." "You ain't doing nobody any good here, wounded." "But," Isaiah protested. "No buts," Mallory said, his voice firm. "That's an order." "Get moving." Isaiah hesitated, then nodded. He knew Mallory was right. He couldn't stay here, not in his condition. He turned and scrambled back, away from the gully, towards the relative safety of the Union line. As he retreated, he saw Mallory standing his ground, his musket blazing, a defiant figure amidst the chaos. He knew that Mallory was staying behind to buy them time, to give them a chance to escape. And he knew with a sinking feeling in his heart that he might never see him again. The price of being a black soldier in this war wasn't just half the pay, it was the whole damn life and then some. Mallory spat, the metallic tang of blood coating his tongue. Another rebel yell ripped through the air, closer this time. He reloaded, ramming the charge home with practiced speed. He risked a glance over the lip of the gully. More of them were coming, a wave of grey and butternut crashing towards the Union line. He had to slow them down just a little. He sighted down the barrel, picked out a man with a tattered flag, and squeezed the trigger. The musket bucked against his shoulder. He didn't see if his shot found its mark. There wasn't time. He reloaded again, his fingers numb despite the heat of battle. "Come on, you sons of bitches," he muttered under his breath. "Come and get some." He fired again and again, the roar of his musket a counterpoint to the screams of the wounded and the thunder of artillery. Each shot was a small act of defiance, a refusal to be broken, to be silenced. He was a soldier, damn it, and he would fight. He would fight for his freedom, for his people, for the right to be treated as a man, even if it meant dying on this forsaken patch of Virginia soil. A bullet whizzed past his ear, close enough to make him flinch. He ducked down, then popped back up, firing again. The rebels were getting closer, their faces contorted with rage and bloodlust. He saw the glint of bayonets, the flash of teeth in snarling mouths. He knew this couldn't last. He was alone, exposed and outnumbered, but he wouldn't give them an inch. He would make them pay for every step they took. A voice yelled out from behind him. "Mallory!" "Get out of there!" He recognized the voice. Sergeant Davies. He ignored him. He had a job to do. Another volley of shots ripped through the air. He felt a sharp pain in his left arm, a searing heat that made him gasp. He dropped his musket. He looked down. A ragged hole had been torn through his sleeve, and blood was blossoming across the fabric. He gritted his teeth, ignoring the pain. He could still fight. He reached for his pistol, his hand slick with blood. He leveled it at the advancing rebels, his eyes narrowed. "This is as far as you go," he said, his voice hoarse. He fired. He fired. The rebel soldier in front crumpled, another dark stain spreading across the grey uniform. Mallory scrambled back, his injured arm throbbing. He fumbled for his ammunition pouch, his fingers clumsy with blood and fear. "Fall back! Fall back to the line!" Someone yelled nearby, the voice cracking with panic. Mallory glanced over his shoulder. The Union line was wavering, men falling back in disarray. The Confederate assault was relentless, a tide of grey washing over the blue. He saw Sergeant Davies, his face grim, trying to rally the men. "Mallory!" "Get back here!" Davies bellowed, waving him forward. He knew he should obey, knew he should retreat with the others. But something held him back. He looked down at his bleeding arm, then at the fallen rebel soldier. The man's eyes were open, staring vacantly at the sky. He thought of Caleb, his brother, buried somewhere in an unmarked grave after Shiloh. He thought of his mother waiting back in Boston, praying for his safe return. He thought of the promise he'd made to himself, to fight for his freedom, for his right to be treated as a man. Retreat wasn't an option. Not today. He saw another rebel soldier charging towards him, bayonet fixed. Mallory braced himself, ignoring the pain in his arm. He shifted his weight, preparing to meet the attack. "Come on, you son of a bitch!" he yelled, his voice raw. The rebel lunged, the bayonet glinting in the sunlight. Mallory sidestepped the attack, narrowly avoiding the deadly point. He brought his pistol down hard on the rebel's head. The man grunted and fell to the ground unconscious. He ripped the rifle from the fallen soldier's grasp, ignoring the searing pain that shot up his arm. He checked the load, then turned back to face the onslaught. He saw a young black soldier, no older than 18, stumble and fall. 2 Confederate soldiers descended on him, their bayonets raised. Mallory didn't hesitate. He charged forward, firing the rebel rifle. One of the Confederates fell, clutching his chest. The other turned, surprise and anger flashing in his eyes. He fired again. The second rebel dropped his bayonet and clutched his throat, choking on his own blood. He ran to the fallen Union soldier, extending a hand. "Get up, soldier." "We gotta move!" The young man looked up at him, his eyes wide with fear. I can't," he stammered. "I'm hit." Mallory knelt down beside him, quickly assessing the injury. A bullet had torn through his leg just above the knee. It was a bad wound, but not immediately life-threatening. "You'll be all right," he said, trying to sound reassuring. "Just gotta get you back to the medics." He helped the young man to his feet, supporting him as they limped towards the rear. The Union line was still crumbling, the retreat turning into a rout. "Thank you," the young soldier said, his voice strained. "Thank you for saving me." Mallory just nodded, his focus on getting them both to safety. He knew the risks they faced. Captured black soldiers were often treated far worse than their white counterparts. They were often executed outright, without even the pretense of a trial. He glanced back at the advancing Confederate line. He saw the hatred in their eyes, the burning desire to crush the rebellion, to preserve their way of life, and he knew with a chilling certainty that they would show no mercy. "Just gotta keep moving," Mallory grunted, the weight of the injured soldier heavy on his shoulder. Each step sent a jolt of pain through his own leg, a dull throb he'd been ignoring for hours. The air crackled with the sounds of battle, the screams of the wounded, the thunder of cannons, the sharp crack of rifles. They won't take us alive," the young soldier gasped, his face pale. Fear, raw and visceral, shone in his eyes. "Not us," Mallory tightened his grip. "Don't talk like that. We're getting out of here." He didn't believe his own words, not entirely. He'd heard the stories, seen the aftermath. Black Union soldiers captured, stripped of their uniforms, and, worse, a cold dread settled in his stomach. They stumbled past a fallen caisson, its wheels splintered, the horses lying still in the mud, their eyes wide and vacant. The smell of gunpowder and blood hung thick in the air, a nauseating reminder of the carnage around them. "Almost there," Mallory lied, spotting the faint outline of the Union Field Hospital tent in the distance. It seemed miles away. Suddenly, a rider appeared, galloping towards them through the chaos. A Union officer, his face grim, his uniform torn. Fall back to the ridge! They've broken through the line!" he yelled, then spurred his horse onward, disappearing into the smoke. The young soldier coughed, a fleck of blood appearing on his lips. "Ridge can't make it." Mallory looked at him, then at the distant ridge, then back at the rapidly approaching Confederate soldiers, their grey uniforms a stark contrast against the smoke-filled sky. He knew they couldn't outrun them. "Not like this." He gently lowered the young man to the ground, propping him against a fallen log. "Stay here, I'll be right back." Where are you going?" the soldier asked, his voice barely a whisper. Mallory didn't answer. He turned and faced the advancing Confederates, drawing his revolver. It was a futile gesture, he knew, but he couldn't just leave the boy. He wouldn't. He took a deep breath, the acrid taste of gunpowder filling his lungs. He was just one man against, how many? 20, 30? It didn't matter. He would buy the young soldier some time, a chance, however slim, of survival. He raised his revolver, aimed at the nearest Confederate, and fired. The man stumbled, clutching his chest, and fell. Mallory fired again, and another Confederate went down. Then the world exploded. A volley of shots ripped through the air, tearing into the ground around him. He felt a sharp, searing pain in his arm, and his revolver slipped from his grasp. He staggered back, momentarily stunned. The Confederates were upon him, their faces contorted with rage. He saw a glint of steel, a bayonet fixed to a rifle, and knew this was it. He closed his eyes, bracing for the impact. But it didn't come. Instead, he heard a shout, a familiar voice cutting through the din of battle. Hold your fire." Mallory opened his eyes. Standing before him, blocking the Confederates, was a man he recognized, a Confederate officer, tall and imposing, with a stern face and piercing blue eyes. It was Captain Claiborne. Hold your fire." Mallory opened his eyes, blinking away the smoke and blood. Standing before him, blocking the Confederates, was Captain Claiborne. The Confederate soldiers, a ragged bunch even by the standards of the rebellion, hesitated. Claiborne was clearly an officer of rank, and his command, though unexpected, carried weight. What in tarnation, Claiborne? A burly sergeant, his face smeared with gunpowder, spat on the ground. "These are colored troops. Lee's orders are clear." Claiborne's jaw tightened. "My orders supersede those, Sergeant. Stand down." His voice was like cracking ice. Mallory, still pinned, couldn't believe what he was seeing. Why was this man, a Confederate officer, protecting him? He tried to push himself up, wincing at the pain in his shoulder. The sergeant glared, his hand hovering near his pistol. "With all due respect, Captain, I saw them kill Jackson. They deserve what's coming." "Jackson was a casualty of war," Claiborne retorted, his gaze unwavering. "These men are prisoners. They will be treated as such," the sergeant scoffed. "Prisoners?" They ain't worth the bullets it'd take to feed 'em. That's enough, Claiborne snapped, drawing his own pistol. The click of the hammer echoed in the sudden silence. Are you questioning my authority, Sergeant? The sergeant, finally recognizing the deadly seriousness in Claiborne's eyes, backed down, muttering under his breath. The other Confederate soldiers shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what to do. Claiborne turned his attention to Mallory. His blue eyes, usually so cold, seemed to hold a flicker of something. Pity? Recognition. Get him up, Claiborne ordered, gesturing to the Confederate soldiers. And the others. See to their wounds. Reluctantly, the soldiers obeyed. 2 of them hauled Mallory to his feet. His shoulder screamed in protest, and he swayed, nearly falling. He leaned heavily on them, trying to understand the situation. Why? Mallory managed to croak, his voice hoarse. Why are you doing this? Claiborne didn't answer immediately. He looked around at the carnage, the bodies of men, both blue and gray, strewn across the field. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and death. Because, he said finally, his voice low, this is not the way to win a war, or to build a nation. He turned and walked away, leaving Mallory and the other stunned Union soldiers in the custody of the bewildered Confederates. As they were led away, Mallory glanced back at Claiborne, a question burning in his eyes. What game was this man playing, and what did it mean for him? A black soldier caught in the crosshairs of a brutal and unforgiving conflict. He knew one thing. Survival for now was a reprieve, not a guarantee. He had to understand Claiborne's motives to navigate this treacherous turn of events. The half-pay he and his fellow black soldiers received paled in comparison to the price the Confederates were so willing to extract. Their lives, Captain Claiborne. Mallory's mind struggled to reconcile the image before him with the man who had spat on him, stripped him of his dignity. Why was he here? Claiborne's voice, amplified by the sudden silence, boomed across the field. These men are under my protection. I demand you cease this slaughter. A Confederate sergeant, face contorted in rage, stepped forward. Captain, these are niggers in Union blue. They're traitors. They deserve what's coming. They are soldiers, and they are under my protection, Claiborne repeated, his hand resting on the hilt of his saber. I will not allow this barbarity to continue. Mallory saw the confusion, the simmering resentment in the faces of the Confederate soldiers. They clearly wanted to finish the job, but they hesitated to defy an officer. He watched Claiborne, his own heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Was this a trick? Another layer of cruelty? Claiborne turned his gaze towards Mallory, his blue eyes locking with his. Mallory, he said, his voice surprisingly even. Get your men out of here now. Mallory, stunned, didn't move. He saw the opportunity, the slim chance of survival. But he also remembered the faces of the fallen, the injustice that had driven him to fight. Why? Mallory managed, his voice hoarse. Why are you doing this? Claiborne's expression hardened. Don't question me. Just get out. This is your only chance. Mallory looked at his men, their faces a mixture of hope and disbelief. He knew he couldn't risk their lives on a question. He nodded to Sergeant Miller, who began to rally the remaining soldiers. As they retreated, Mallory couldn't shake the feeling that he was abandoning something. He glanced back at Claiborne, who stood defiantly before the Confederate line, a lone figure against a tide of hate. The days that followed were a blur of retreat, regrouping, and whispered rumors. Mallory's regiment was pulled back from the front lines, reassigned to guard supply trains. The humiliation of their defeat, compounded by the lingering questions about Claiborne's intervention, hung heavy in the air. Weeks later, a messenger arrived at their camp, bearing a tattered envelope. It was addressed to Mallory. Inside, a single sheet of paper contained only a few lines. They will not let me live with this. I did what I thought was right. Remember that something good can come from even the darkest of places. Mallory's hand trembled as he read the note. He knew what it meant. Claiborne had paid the ultimate price for his act of defiance. He had chosen honor over loyalty, humanity over hatred. The war dragged on, its relentless tide claiming more lives, both black and white. Mallory fought on, driven by a newfound sense of purpose. He fought for the fallen, for the future, for the memory of a Confederate officer who had dared to defy the madness of his time. The Emancipation Proclamation had promised freedom, but the reality was far from it. Even after the war ended, the struggle continued. The fight for equality, for respect, for the simple right to live without fear was far from over. Mallory returned to his home in Mississippi a changed man. He found his family broken but alive. He worked the land, rebuilt his life, and became a voice for his community. He spoke out against injustice, organized voter registration drives, and challenged the deeply entrenched racism that poisoned the South. He never forgot the men he had fought alongside, the men he had lost. He never forgot the injustice of being paid half the wage of a white soldier, the terror of knowing that capture meant certain death. And he never forgot Captain Claiborne, the man who had saved his life and, in doing so, had shown him the true meaning of courage. Years later, Mallory stood before a small gathering of people, a group of black and white children listening intently. He was telling them the story of the Civil War, the story of sacrifice, and the story of hope. He spoke of the battles, the hardships, and the unwavering spirit of the black soldiers who had fought for their freedom. He spoke of the hatred that had fueled the conflict, and the courage that had dared to challenge it. And then he told them about Captain Claiborne. He described the man's stern face, his piercing blue eyes, and the moment he had stood against his own army to save the lives of black soldiers. He wasn't perfect, Mallory said, his voice raspy with age. He was a product of his time, a man caught in the grip of a terrible conflict. But in that moment, he chose to do what was right. He chose humanity over hatred. And that, Mallory paused, his eyes glistening, is a lesson we must never forget. He looked out at the faces of the children, their eyes wide with wonder and understanding. He saw in them the hope for a better future, a future where the color of a person's skin would no longer determine their fate. He smiled, a slow, weary smile that reached deep into his soul. He had lived a long and difficult life, a life filled with pain and loss, but also with moments of extraordinary courage and unwavering hope. He had seen the worst of humanity, and he had also seen its best. And he knew with absolute certainty that the fight for justice, for equality, for a world where all people are treated with dignity and respect, was a fight worth fighting. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land. The children began to disperse, their voices echoing in the twilight. Mallory stood alone, gazing out at the fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. He closed his eyes, and he saw the faces of the fallen, the faces of the forgotten, the faces of the brave. He saw the face of Captain Claiborne, a Confederate officer who had dared to defy the madness of his time. And he knew in that moment that their sacrifices had not been in vain. He knew that the seeds of freedom had been planted, and that one day they would blossom into a world where all people are truly equal. He opened his eyes, and he saw a single star twinkling in the night sky. It was a small star, but it shone brightly, a beacon of hope in the darkness. He took a deep breath and he smiled. He had lived a good life. He had fought the good fight, and he had left the world a little bit better than he had found it. He turned and walked towards his home, his footsteps echoing in the stillness of the night. He was an old man, weary and worn, but he was also a man of peace, a man of hope, a man of unwavering faith. And as he walked, he knew that the story of the Civil War, the story of sacrifice and redemption, would continue to be told, generation after generation. And he knew that the memory of Captain Claiborne, the Confederate officer who had dared to defy the madness of his time, would live on forever, a testament to the power of courage, compassion, and the enduring spirit of humanity, the image of that single, bright star, a tiny